My boyfriend's sister makes remarks that have subtly bothered me, frequently recently. Do I bring it up to my boyfriend or let it go? When I first started dating my boyfriend, it was immediately clear just how close he was to his family. They weren't just people he saw on holidays or called occasionally, they were deeply intertwined in his daily life. At first, I found it endearing. I admired how much they valued one another and how effortlessly they seemed to maintain those bonds. But as our relationship grew more serious, I realized that their closeness wasn't just a part of his life, it was a part of ours. And as we crossed the 2-year mark, I knew I needed to make more of an effort to connect with them, particularly with his sister. His sister, a strong-willed and seemingly self-assured woman just a couple of years younger than him, had always intrigued me. From the few interactions we had early on, I could tell she was the type of person who spoke her mind without hesitation. At times, I admired her confidence. Other times, her bluntness made me feel uneasy, as though I needed to tread carefully around her. Still, she was important to him, and that made her important to me. Her husband, an amiable but slightly reserved man, was easier for me to get along with. He had an understated humor that matched my own, and our shared profession gave us plenty to talk about. It was clear he adored his wife and leaned on her strength, especially in this current season of their lives as they prepared to welcome their first child. Despite the challenges they were facing, they seemed like a solid team. So, when my boyfriend suggested we start spending more time with them, I agreed. I knew how much it would mean to him for me to build a stronger connection with his family, especially with his sister. It felt like a natural next step in our relationship, one that could potentially bring us closer together. But as the weeks went by, I found myself increasingly hesitant. It wasn't one particular moment that caused my apprehension, but rather a series of small, uncomfortable interactions that began to chip away at my enthusiasm. Each incident left me questioning whether I was overthinking things, whether I was being too sensitive, or whether there was something deeper I needed to address. One of the first moments that gave me pause happened at her baby shower. I had spent a considerable amount of time choosing a gift that I thought she would genuinely appreciate, a luxurious self-care set from an all-natural beauty brand. It wasn't a household name, but it was high quality, safe for pregnancy, and thoughtfully curated. I had even gone the extra mile to research the ingredients to ensure everything was suitable for her condition. When she opened the gift in front of the gathered friends and family, I waited anxiously for her reaction. She held up the set, inspecting it for a moment, before saying with a chuckle, "I should be able to use this now. It's not any of the boy stuff like insert expensive brand here. Her tone was casual, her comment almost offhand, but it landed with a thud in my chest. The implication stung, that my carefully chosen gift wasn't boy enough to warrant the same level of consideration as the brands she mentioned. It didn't matter that the gift was in the same price range as those luxury products. Her words made it seem lesser, and by extension, made me feel lesser for having given it. I reminded myself not to read too much into it. She was pregnant, perhaps overwhelmed, and likely didn't mean anything by it. I smiled politely and moved on, pushing the discomfort to the back of my mind. After all, it wasn't a big deal, not really. But then came the comment about my job. It happened during one of our weekend get-togethers, a casual afternoon at their place filled with snacks and chatter. My boyfriend, ever proud of my accomplishments, mentioned that I was considering a new job offer. I hadn't even decided whether to take it yet, but the opportunity was exciting and a testament to how far I'd come in my career. Before I could say much about it, his sister interjected, her tone light but her words cutting. "Well, that makes sense because you must have been a diversity hire." No offense, but you know women in tech are diversity hires. For a moment, I was too stunned to respond. Her statement hung in the air, stark and unfiltered. I felt my cheeks flush with a mix of anger and embarrassment. It wasn't just the insinuation that my success was unearned, it was the casual ease with which she dismissed my hard work, my education, and my experience. I had graduated from one of the top universities in the country and had poured years of effort into building my career. Her words reduced all of that to a checkbox on a diversity form. My boyfriend must have noticed my discomfort because he quickly changed the subject, steering the conversation away from the awkwardness. I didn't bring it up again, choosing instead to file it away with the growing list of small slights I wasn't sure how to address. I tried to remind myself of her circumstances. Her husband had been laid off recently and was actively job hunting in the same field as me. With a baby on the way, the stress they were under must have been immense. Perhaps her comment wasn't meant to demean me but was instead an outlet for her own frustrations. Still, it was hard to shake the sting. As the weeks went on, I noticed another pattern that made me uneasy: her frequent references to my boyfriend's past relationships. At first, they seemed harmless, framed as fond memories of the time the three of them had spent together during graduate school. "Remember when you dated X and we all went to that Halloween party?" she'd say, her voice full of nostalgia. I brushed it off as innocent reminiscing. After all, they had shared a lot of history before I came into the picture. But then the comments started to take a different tone. "We used to hear you and X talking through the walls at like 3 in the morning, she said once, a mischievous smile on her face. Another time, she casually mentioned, "Dad really liked when you dated Y." These remarks weren't just about shared memories, they were veiled reminders of the women who had come before me, women who had once been part of this tight-knit family. It felt like an unspoken comparison, one I couldn't win because I wasn't part of their history. I was the outsider, the new addition who didn't quite fit the mold. Each comment left me questioning my place in their family dynamic. Was I overreacting? Was I being too sensitive? Or was there something intentional in the way she brought up these memories, something meant to subtly remind me of the years I hadn't been there? By the end of the month, I found myself dreading the next family gathering. I wanted to believe the best of her, to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was just blunt, as my boyfriend often reminded me. Maybe I was reading too much into things. But the small slights and pointed comments were adding up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't as harmless as they seemed. The baby shower was supposed to be a light-hearted occasion, a day to celebrate the joy of new beginnings and to surround her with love and support as she prepared for motherhood. I had been looking forward to it for weeks, meticulously planning my gift in hopes of showing how much I cared and wanted to contribute to this milestone in her life. I wanted her to know I respected her, admired her strength, and valued our growing connection even if we weren't as close as I hoped we'd be someday. When I chose the self-care set, I put a lot of thought into it. It wasn't just a grab-and-go purchase. I spent hours researching products that were safe for pregnancy, poring over ingredient lists, reading reviews, and comparing brands. I decided on an all-natural beauty line, one known for its high quality and gentle formulas. While it wasn't a household name, it was trusted in niche wellness circles, and I thought it would feel personal, thoughtful, and luxurious. When the day of the shower arrived, I carried the carefully wrapped package with a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. The gathering was cozy but bustling, a mix of friends, family, and co-workers, all gathered to celebrate her and the baby. My boyfriend and I arrived together, and though I still felt a bit like an outsider among her friends and extended family, I reminded myself that I was here to show my support. The gift exchange came toward the end of the afternoon, as the room settled into a quieter rhythm. Her husband handed her one gift after another, and I couldn't help but feel a small flicker of pride as she reached for mine. I had tied the ribbon myself, choosing a soft pastel color to match the theme of the shower. She unwrapped it slowly, peeling back the layers of delicate paper until the box was revealed. She lifted the set from its packaging, inspecting the contents with a neutral expression. "This is nice," she said, holding up one of the bath bombs. For a brief moment, relief washed over me. But then she added, with a wry chuckle, "I should be able to use this now. It's not any of the bougie stuff, like insert popular luxury brand here. The words landed like a sharp pinprick. The room buzzed with the murmurs of other guests chatting and laughing, but for me, everything seemed to go quiet. I managed a polite smile, but inwardly, I was reeling. My heart sank as her words repeated in my head. Not any of the boy stuff. It wasn't just the words themselves, but the implication behind them that my gift was somehow lesser, that it wasn't worthy of the same admiration or prestige as the brands she mentioned. What stung even more was knowing the price point of my gift. The self-care set had cost just as much as the boy brands she listed, brands known more for their name recognition than the quality or safety of their products. But I hadn't chosen a popular name because I wanted something more personal, more intentional. I had thought about her in her pregnancy, about what would be safe and soothing for her during this time. That thoughtfulness felt overlooked, as though the effort I had put into choosing the gift didn't matter. I tried to brush it off. Maybe she hadn't meant anything by it. Maybe it was just her usual bluntness, the same straightforwardness my boyfriend often assured me was simply her way of communicating. But even as I told myself not to take it personally, I couldn't help but feel deflated. The pride I had felt moments earlier was gone, replaced by a gnawing sense of inadequacy. Throughout the rest of the shower, I struggled to shake the lingering discomfort. I found myself second-guessing not just the gift but my entire approach to our relationship. Had I misjudged what she might appreciate? Was I trying too hard to win her approval? Or was this simply another instance where her bluntness, though unintentional, left me feeling diminished? Later that evening, as my boyfriend and I drove home, I debated whether to bring it up. He seemed in good spirits, reminiscing about the shower and the people we had seen. Part of me wanted to tell him how her comment had made me feel, but I hesitated. I didn't want to seem overly sensitive or as though I was making a mountain out of a molehill. After all, it was just a passing remark, right? Not worth causing a fuss over. But another part of me couldn't let it go. This wasn't the first time her words had struck a nerve, and I worried it wouldn't be the last. "Did you have a good time?" he asked, glancing at me as we stopped at a red light. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "It was nice." He nodded, seemingly satisfied with my response, and I let the conversation drift to other topics. But the uneasy feeling in my chest lingered, a quiet reminder that, no matter how much I wanted to believe otherwise, something about my relationship with his sister felt off. That night, as I replayed the moment in my head, I couldn't help but wonder, was this just her personality, as my boyfriend often claimed? Or was there something more intentional behind her words? I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt, I truly did. But the more I thought about it, the harder it became to ignore the sting of her casual dismissal. And what bothered me most wasn't just the comment itself but the broader implications it seemed to carry. If she could make me feel this way over something as simple as a gift, what did that mean for the future of our relationship? Would I always feel like I was falling short, like my efforts to connect with her weren't enough? Or was this just a temporary hurdle, something I could learn to navigate with time and patience? As I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, I made a silent vow to myself. I would try harder to understand her. I would keep making the effort to build a relationship, even if it felt one-sided at times. But I also knew I couldn't ignore the way her words had made me feel. If these moments continued, I would have to find a way to address them, whether that meant talking to her directly or finally opening up to my boyfriend about my concerns. For now, though, I resolved to give her the benefit of the doubt. After all, she was about to become a mother, and I wanted to be there to support her, to show her that I cared. But deep down, a part of me worried that no matter how much effort I put in, I would never quite measure up. The afternoon had been going well enough, at least, as well as these family gatherings typically went. The four of us were sitting in their living room, the warm hum of casual conversation filling the air. Her husband, still in good spirits despite the challenges he was facing, was sharing updates about his job search. I felt a pang of sympathy for him as he spoke. We worked in the same field, and I knew just how competitive it could be, especially in his area of expertise. With the baby on the way, the stakes were even higher. I had offered to look over his resume a couple of weeks earlier, but he'd politely declined. I didn't take it personally, he seemed the type to want to handle things on his own. Still, I wondered if there was more I could do to help. It wasn't my place to interfere, but the tension surrounding his unemployment was palpable, lingering in the air like an uninvited guest. At some point during the conversation, my boyfriend, ever the proud partner, casually mentioned that I had recently received a job offer. "She's still deciding whether to take it," he said, his tone light and filled with admiration. "But it's a great opportunity, and they're offering her a pretty competitive package." I smiled awkwardly, suddenly feeling self-conscious. While I appreciated his support, I hadn't wanted to make a big deal of it, especially given the circumstances. The timing felt off. Her husband was actively searching for work, and the last thing I wanted was to come across as boastful. Her response came quickly, her voice cutting through the room like a cold breeze. "Well, that makes sense," she said, her tone matter-of-fact but carrying an unmistakable edge. "You must have been a diversity hire. No offense, but you know women in tech are diversity hires." For a moment, I wasn't sure I had heard her correctly. The words hung in the air, sharp and stinging, as if they had been dipped in poison. I felt my cheeks flush, a mix of anger and humiliation rising within me. My boyfriend shifted uncomfortably beside me, his brow furrowing slightly, but he said nothing. I glanced at her, searching her expression for some sign of remorse or even a hint that she was joking. But her face remained neutral, as if what she had said was the most natural thing in the world. Her husband didn't react either, instead staring at the floor as though willing himself to disappear. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. "Actually," I said, my voice steady but cool, "I graduated from a top university, and I've worked hard to get where I am. So, no, I'm not a diversity hire." She shrugged, unbothered. "I didn't mean anything by it," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "It's just the way the industry works. They need to fill quotas, and women are in high demand right now." The casualness of her dismissal made it worse. It wasn't just what she had said, it was the ease with which she had undermined my accomplishments, as though everything I had achieved was the result of some policy rather than my own hard work and talent. It felt like a slap in the face, and I struggled to keep my emotions in check. The conversation shifted quickly after that, as if everyone in the room sensed the tension and wanted to move on. My boyfriend changed the subject, steering us toward safer topics, but I couldn't focus. Her words echoed in my mind, replaying over and over like a broken record. "Diversity hire. No offense. Just the way the industry works." As the afternoon wore on, I found myself retreating into my thoughts, replaying not just this moment but others like it. Moments where her bluntness had left me questioning my worth, where her words had cut deeper than they should have. I knew she was under a lot of stress. Her husband's unemployment, the looming arrival of their baby, these were heavy burdens to bear. But did that excuse what she had said? Did it make it okay to belittle me, to reduce my achievements to a stereotype? Later that evening, as my boyfriend and I drove home, the silence between us was heavy. I knew he could sense my unease, but he didn't bring it up until we were nearly home. "Are you okay?" he asked, glancing at me as he pulled into the driveway. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to let it go, to chalk it up to her being stressed or blunt or whatever other excuse I could muster. But another part of me, the part that was tired of brushing these moments under the rug, wanted him to understand how deeply her words had affected me. "Not really," I admitted finally. "What she said earlier, about me being a diversity hire, that wasn't okay." He sighed, leaning back in his seat. "She doesn't mean anything by it," he said, his tone weary. "She's just blunt. You know how she is." I bristled at his response. It wasn't the first time he had used this explanation, and while I understood his instinct to defend her, it didn't make her words hurt any less. Blunt doesn't mean you can say whatever you want without considering how it affects people, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I know, he said quickly, holding up a hand. But she's under a lot of stress right now. I think she's just frustrated about everything going on with her husband, and it's coming out in ways it shouldn't. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that her comment had nothing to do with me, that it was simply a projection of her own frustrations. But even if that were true, it didn't change the fact that it had hurt. It didn't change the fact that this wasn't the first time her words had left me feeling small. I just don't know how much more of this I can take, I admitted softly. Every time we're around her, it feels like she says something that cuts me down, and I don't know if it's intentional or if I'm just being too sensitive. Either way, it's exhausting. He reached for my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. I'll talk to her, he said. I'll make sure she knows that what she said wasn't okay. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely convinced that a conversation would change anything. Still, it was a start, and for now, that was enough. As I climbed out of the car and walked into the house, I resolved to keep trying for my boyfriend's sake, if nothing else. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much larger challenge. The history they shared was extensive, years of memories built long before I came into the picture. My boyfriend, his sister, and her husband had spent a significant chunk of their 20s together, navigating the chaos of graduate school and the formative experiences that came with it. It was a bond I couldn't replicate, and I didn't want to. I respected their closeness, admired the strength of their connection. But as time went on, I began to feel like a spectator in my own relationship, an outsider peering into a world that didn't have a place for me. The memories she brought up initially felt innocent enough. They were filled with the kind of nostalgia that comes from revisiting a simpler time. Remember that Halloween party? You were dressed as a pirate, and we couldn't stop laughing at how you kept tripping over your sword. At first, I smiled along, happy to learn more about his life before we met, even if it occasionally involved mentions of his past relationships. After all, everyone has a past, and I didn't expect him to erase his history just because I was now part of his present. But slowly, her comments began to shift. The light-hearted anecdotes gave way to remarks that carried an edge I couldn't quite ignore. We used to hear you and X talking through the walls at like 3 a.m, she said once, a knowing smile on her face. The way she said it made it clear that talking wasn't what she meant. My cheeks flushed, and I glanced at my boyfriend, hoping he would step in, but he only chuckled awkwardly and changed the subject. Another time, she said, Dad really liked when you dated Y. He said she reminded him of Mom when they first met. The comment was casual, offhand, but it struck a nerve. I wasn't sure what stung more, the implication that I didn't measure up or the fact that my boyfriend didn't seem to notice how uncomfortable it made me. He brushed it off as harmless reminiscing, just another example of her blunt personality. But to me, it felt deliberate, as if she were testing me, reminding me that I wasn't the first and, in her eyes, might not be the best. I wanted to believe it wasn't intentional. I told myself that she didn't mean to hurt me, that her comments were just a reflection of her unfiltered way of speaking. But as the instances piled up, it became harder to convince myself that there wasn't something more beneath the surface. Was it a subtle way of asserting dominance, of reminding me that she knew him better, longer, and in ways I never could? Or was I overthinking, letting my insecurities warp her words into something they weren't? Talking to my boyfriend felt like the obvious solution, but the thought filled me with dread. He was incredibly close with his sister, fiercely protective of her. Anytime I brought up her bluntness, he would wave it off with the same refrain, "That's just how she is." I didn't want to come across as overly sensitive or like I was trying to drive a wedge between them. At the same time, I couldn't keep ignoring how her words made me feel. The resentment was building, threatening to spill over if I didn't address it. The breaking point came during another family gathering, a casual dinner at their parents' house. The evening was pleasant enough at first, lots of laughter and good food, the kind of warmth I had come to associate with his family. But as the night wore on, the conversation inevitably turned to old memories. His sister, emboldened by a couple of glasses of wine, launched into a story about one of his exes. "Do you remember when you and ex took that road trip and got lost in the middle of nowhere?" she said, laughing. "You called me freaking out because your GPS wasn't working. I had to send you directions from my computer. Oh, an ex kept saying she was going to strangle you for not printing a map." The table erupted in laughter, but I sat frozen, a forced smile plastered on my face. I didn't need to know about the intimate moments he had shared with ex, about the way his sister had been so deeply involved in their relationship. It wasn't just the story, it was the constant reminders that I wasn't part of those years, that I didn't have the same history with him that she did. On the drive home, I couldn't keep it in any longer. "Why does she keep bringing up your exes?" I blurted out, my voice shaking with frustration. He looked at me, surprised. "She's just reminiscing," he said. "She doesn't mean anything by it." "But it feels intentional," I said. "Every time she brings them up, it's like she's trying to remind me that they were part of your life before me, that I'm just the latest in a long line of girlfriends. It's exhausting." He sighed, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "She's not trying to undermine you," he said. "She's just blunt. That's how she is." "Maybe so," I said, my voice quieter now. "But it doesn't change how it makes me feel. I'm trying to build a relationship with her, but every time she says something like that, it feels like she's putting up a wall." He didn't respond right away, and for a moment, I worried I had pushed too far. But then he nodded, his expression softening. "I'll talk to her," he said. "I didn't realize it was bothering you this much." The conversation gave me a sliver of hope, but it also left me wondering if things would ever truly change. His sister wasn't going anywhere, she was a permanent fixture in his life, and by extension, mine. If I wanted our relationship to succeed, I would have to find a way to coexist with her, to navigate the complicated dynamics of their bond without losing myself in the process. Over the next few weeks, I made a conscious effort to let go of the resentment I had been carrying. I reminded myself that her words didn't define my worth, that her closeness with him didn't diminish my place in his life. But I also resolved to set boundaries, to speak up when her bluntness crossed the line. It wasn't easy, and I knew it wouldn't be a quick fix. But for the sake of my relationship and my own peace of mind, it was a step I needed to take. By the end of the year, things had started to improve. My boyfriend's talk with her seemed to have made a difference, and while she still had her moments, the pointed comments about his exes became less frequent. It wasn't perfect, and I doubted it ever would be. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was finding my footing in their family dynamic. The road ahead wasn't clear, but I was willing to keep trying. After all, love isn't just about the relationship you have with one person, it's about learning to navigate the connections that come with them. And while I couldn't control his sister's words or actions, I could control how I responded to them. That, I realized, was where my power lay.